Welcome back to Disciple Dojo. If you watched our previous episode, Ellie walked us through the book of Job at sort of a big picture level and things, tips for reading and studying and things to avoid when reading and studying the book of Job. But you also sent in a number of questions. I asked and you delivered. So in this episode, we got a chance to ask those questions to Ellie and have her answer them. And that's what this, consider it a bonus episode. I hope you enjoyed the first one. If you haven't already watched the first episode, though, go watch that one before you watch this episode, because a lot of the questions that we got are already covered in our previous discussion. So watch that one first, then come back and watch this one as we put Ellie Wiener on the rapid fire hot seat of questions about the book of Job. If you appreciate this and you want to support this ministry and you enjoy conversations like this, the best way that you can help ensure that more of them happen, if you haven't already, is by clicking that little subscribe button. And when you do, there's a little bell icon. Tap that. That enables notifications. That tells YouTube, hey, I like this channel and I want to know when more content from this channel is available. That really helps us, especially in YouTube's algorithms. It helps more people see this channel. So thank you if you have done so already. Greatly appreciate it. All right, let's get to some Job Q&A with Ellie Wiener of Cambridge University. So now we're going to have a Jobin expert. Ellie Wiener is going to answer your questions about the book of Job. You don't want to hear my answers, folks. We got a bona fide expert. So I'm going to ask these questions. These were questions taken from Facebook and from YouTube and some of the ones on Instagram, but a lot of the questions are the same. And so no surprise there. So I'm pulling up on Facebook and let's go with, so let me just, this will cover a lot of the questions. Answer as simplistically as possible. Is Job a historical book or not? How do you take that one? Because that's probably the number one question that people asked.
Yeah. Yep. And I get that a lot in churches as well. Yeah, as I'm chatting with people. Okay. Yes, it's actually a much less simple question than it first sounds, because for one, I would want to ask any person who asks that question what they mean by history.
Mm-hmm.
It could be quite a loaded term. And there are a couple complicating factors when you look at a book like Job. So generally, when I'm reading the biblical text, I want to be thinking about the issue of intention. Right. So what is the author intending to communicate, and what is the implied audience assumed to understand? And so you can be dealing with truth, right? As long as you're dealing within kind of that frame of intention. What claim is the text making, and how is that claim being received by the audience? Okay, so is Job intending to be read as history? If by history you mean that someone was taking down by dictation the entire dialogue between Job and his friends, I would say we've probably pushed a bit to a point of absurdity there. Like, this is highly sophisticated Hebrew poetry, and I've never actually met anyone who opines that eloquently when they're in the depths of their suffering. Okay, so it's a highly stylized literary work of art, right? Like we talked about in the first episode, the prologue being also stylized and setting up this extreme thought experiment. So clearly it's doing something as literature. It's trying to sort of pull you into the world of the text. Now, does that mean there was never a person named Job that lived? Not at all necessarily the case. Like, you have Ezekiel 14, which mentions Noah, Job, and Daniel or Daniel together. That's the only other reference to Job outside of the book within the Old Testament. Does that mean that Ezekiel was reading the entire book of Job that had already been fully composed, and that Yeah, everything about the contours of what we now have in the book of Job was known to him. Not necessarily. It could be that he knew of a story of a very righteous man who lived named Job, who suffered a lot and interceded. It's a pretty spare reference there. I think for a lot of people, one of the stronger cases for Job being a historical figure is that James 5 is the other place where Job's referenced in the Bible, the only place in the New Testament. And James is saying, be patient, wait for the coming of the Lord, look at the farmer, and then look at the prophets, see their patience in the face of their suffering, and then Job. And so that juxtaposition of the prophets and Job for a lot of people is like, well, if the prophets are real dudes, then surely Job.
Right.
Yeah. So that to say, it's complicated. It's a bit less straightforward than coming, for instance, to Kings, where you have these temporal indicators that link up the events with other events in Israel's history, sometimes with other kings in the ancient Near East. You don't have that sort of thing in Job. Doesn't mean you necessarily need that in order for Job to be a person who lived and was a God-fearer and suffered. But I guess I would become a bit hesitant. I feel a bit hesitant in sort of pushing to the specific boundaries of what that means or entails.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Do I need to clarify anything there?
Well, people are just going to want to go, oh, you're just hemming and hawing and you just don't want to give an answer. Because that's what they say to me when I say Job could be a real person or Job could be a literary folk tale, fable. He could be a thought experiment. He could be a parable, not grammatically or like literarily, but just in the idea is he could be a character, not a real person, and it wouldn't change anything about the book or the New Testament references to him or the other Old Testament references to him. Same thing. I take the same approach with Jonah. I think Jonah bears a lot of the same questions of historicity, literalness versus something else is going on. This is more literary than like a chronicle of a person. And people, the question resides in people's discomfort with theological liberalism or their discomfort with fundamentalism. So depending on which side of the spectrum they're coming from, the academic secularist will be like, well, surely you can't believe that there's this actual divine council that met and decided we're going to make a bet about Job, blah, blah, blah. And so they want you to say, no, it's purely fictitious folktale, folklore. And then fundamentalism is just like, no, every word has to be what it says at face value. And there's no room for that the biblical writers would use what we today would categorize as fiction or embellishment or folklore or something like that. And
that's why I just want to say it is important what it's intending to do.
Right.
So I'm just trying to read the intent of the text.
Right.
And at this stage, I'm not convinced that Job is demanding that you read it historically. Again, being careful by what we mean when we say historical.
Yeah.
It's not going to endanger my doctrine of Scripture one way or another. Though I also am very comfortable saying that, of course I believe that God acts in history. And of course, this could have all happened. I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
I just want to sort of, as I mentioned in the earlier episode, kind of read along the grain of the text as best I can.
Yeah.
And not miss the questions it really wants me to focus on, which are not so much historical questions, I don't think.
Yeah. It's not what God could do. It's what God did do. And what Scripture does claim, what it intends. I like how you put that, and that's so true. So folks, wrestle with it, chew on it, and don't dismiss somebody's view or opinion or thoughts or teaching based on whether or not they think a book like Job or a book like Jonah or a book like a Song of Songs or whatever is reporting factual history, because those are genre matters. Intention matters. So listen and weigh it.
Just real quick on this as well. I know we need to move on, but since a lot of people are asking about this, I think it's also worth raising that this question about what genre Job is and whether he's a real person or not. This is actually a very old question. So there's a place in the Babylonian Talmud, which is, probably the foremost compilation of rabbinic Jewish debate
Mhm.
on, matters of doctrine and law and these sorts of things. There's discussion about whether or not Job was a parable. And you have these two rabbis with different opinions. One's like, well, yeah, he clearly wasn't a real person. It's just a parable. Another one's like, oh, but it says there was a man in land of Uz. And he's like, well, Nathan's parable to King David after he sinned with Bathsheba starts with, there were two men, in a Hebrew phrase that's very similar to how Job starts.
Right.
And then the other rabbi's like, well, but it gives his name and the place where he lived. So clearly he was a real person. So you see, already in early centuries AD, that this is a discussion within rabbinic Jewish circles as well.
Yeah,
It's
not a question of
not a
modern
weird
liberalism.
question.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. Anyway, we can move on, but that will cover a lot of questions, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the next question that a lot of people asked had to do with when Job was written. Some have claimed that it's the oldest book in the Bible, and others have claimed no, it's intentionally set back, like you said, once upon a time. So it's intentionally anachronistic because it's trying to situate. Others have said no, it was written. Well, anyway, just a bunch of different views. But what do you make of? Is it the oldest book in the Bible? Is it the most recent book in the Bible, or is it somewhere in between?
I think the most honest commentators say, listen, we have no idea. So the range of dates will honestly go from like the 11th century to the 2nd century. Like people will just put the book at such widely variant places on that timeline.
Yeah.
And I've seen people argue from the language of the book, from its Hebrew, both for early date and late date. I've seen people point to little indicators in the text, like, oh, when were the Chaldeans raiding? Like sometimes people try to go that route. Is it possible for literature to archaize, to try to look old? Yeah, like I could write in Shakespearean English, theoretically, if I wanted to, or at least sprinkle some in. So I'm fairly comfortably agnostic. If I really had to choose, I would probably go for a later date for the book, largely because of the way that Job is so interconnected with other parts of the Old Testament. So there is a lot of resonance. Sometimes it looks like outright borrowing. And when you look at those instances, especially where the verbal overlap is very close, it just seems that Job is more likely to be later. So for instance, in chapter 7 of Job, there's a parody of Psalm 8. Now, parody is a sort of thing that's a later development. So it would make sense for whoever's writing Job to have read Psalm 8 and then to be changing it, putting it in a new context. That is maybe a point in favor of a later date. But again, range of opinions. We don't know who the author is. We don't have anything definitive to say about when it was written. So.
All right. Well, here's the next question is, what do you think about the equation of Elihu with Elijah, Eliahu? Is there any connection there, or is it just purely coincidence of name?
Yeah, some people have said, so it's the same name, except rather than the shortened version of Yahweh, it's, no, actually, sorry. Rather than he, the Hebrew word for he, so he is my God, it'd be Yahweh is God in the case of Elijah's name. So the names are very similar in Hebrew. Some would say that Elihu is this precursor to God's entrance in a similar way to how Elijah is supposed to be this precursor for God's reentrance at the end of Malachi. So this sort of prepare for theophany, as it were. Maybe there's something there that even if that were the case, that wouldn't change my characterization of Elihu, because I would then say it's a bit ironic that he's kind of this anti-preparation for God, as in we just are ready for God, and he's more of a stall than a preparation. But yeah.
All right. Moving on, somebody asked, how much credence do you think we should give the theological musings of Job's friends? Can they say, I mean, are they saying things that are right? Are they all wrong? Is it just situational?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, this is one of the reasons why chapter 42 is really important. And if it's not the case that God's saying everything that they say is theological rubbish, because they've actually, the direction of address has been wrong,
Hmm.
um, yeah, then that may be helpful in terms of how we sift through the words that they're saying. I mean, Paul actually quotes from Eliphaz in First Corinthians.
Right.
So you do have that at least. He uses the phrase, he catches the wise in their craftiness. And that, yeah, occurs in First Corinthians. So, let me just say, Paul read the whole book of Job. So if that's your only motivation to read the whole thing,
Yeah.
good. I would be really careful though. Like I would just not be proof texting anything from Job, just like pulling something out of Bildad and slapping that on. I would be really careful because I just think, oh, it's so important to be reading the parts in light of the whole of Job. Um, yeah. So I personally would not be very um, very liberally just grabbing bits from the middle of the dialogues
Yeah.
and
That's a good rule of
applying
thumb
them,
for any book of the
repurposing.
Bible.
Yeah, yeah, generally it's
especially
probably not the
especially
rule of thumb.
Job, and those
Yeah,
other books. That's again when I taught
yeah,
on Ecclesiastes, I had to say the same thing. Like, don't build a doctrine off a verse in a
yeah,
book that may not be expressing
yeah,
theological truth. It may be
yeah.
critiquing that theology, and
Mm,
yeah,
yeah.
proof texting always bad, regardless. Next question: what of Job ought we to emulate while going through suffering?
Speak to God. Speak to God.
Mm,
Um, yeah, genuinely. And intercede. Like I take it as a moral imperative from the book of Job to intercede for others when I'm standing alongside them in their suffering. So yeah, prayerfulness, genuinely. Um, and yeah, and I think our kind of role alongside each other is to help each other hang in there while we wait for God's answer.
mm,
Since God has answered us climactically in Jesus' first coming, he will answer consummately in his second coming. So, yeah, in a sense, God has already answered. I think we can also, yeah, still be speaking to God and asking him to make himself known in the particular circumstances that we're facing and be ready for him to answer us in a way that isn't quite what we were expecting. But speak to him. Yeah.
nice. I love that answer. Okay, this person asks, is there a dramatized reading of Job somewhere that one can watch or listen to and clearly differentiate the various speakers? Job is so confusing to listen to and remember who's talking. And we talked about that in the first episode that may be intentional. But do
Yeah.
you know of any, like, not just written, are there any multimedia presentations of Job or
Just the text of Job, not like because there are lots of Job has been put to
yeah,
drama, to
not
music,
retellings of Job, but like, yeah,
yeah,
like
actual.
dramatized
Oh
readings
man,
or
yeah. Not that I know of. Some people have asked me if I would do sort of like a one man Job by just reciting it. I've not done that, so I can't point you there.
well, if
um,
you want to do
yeah,
that, we will help sponsor it and make that happen. So
we
that'd be
just change
awesome.
my hats for the different characters.
Yes, the big
Um,
hat with a B on it, and then one with a
yeah.
Z, and then one with an E.
No, but sorry, no, I'm afraid I don't have anything specific to point them
Yeah,
to.
no, that's okay. I didn't.
You do it.
I knew if
Do it.
somebody did know, it would be you. I don't know. I know of very little on Job in general for popular audiences.
Yeah.
And that's why
Yeah.
most of what I know about Job is scholarly work, and it's inaccessible to a lot of the readers who
Um,
have questions.
sure.
I've kind of teased with Richard about us putting together a study guide or something for the average folk. Who
Mm,
knows if that'll ever happen, but it's needed. There's definitely needed for sure. Okay, so a lot of questions, same thing. Chronologically, where does Job fall in the Bible? And just talk a little bit about why you see the book, why the book is set. You would say it's set in the last episode. You said it's a patriarchal setting, the patriarch setting, and in the East maybe.
Yeah.
What are some of the indicators that would see whether it's history or not?
Mm.
Where is the once upon a time most likely supposed to bring the reader's mind to?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, yeah, Job being non-Israelite, in some ways, he still kind of looks like Abraham, and the patriarchs. So, um, except he's like better than Noah and Abraham
Hmm.
and David, probably like all put together. And so I think to kind of put him in the patriarchal time sort of puts him on par with Abraham, and then you can even bring him up from there. As kind of, yeah, the non-Israelite version and even more glowingly described. But Abraham's fear of God is very high profile, especially in Genesis 22,
Uh-huh.
for instance, kind of testing fear of God, where, yeah, in Genesis 22, Abraham has to bring his son Isaac. Um, so I wonder if that's part of what's going on in terms of why set in a patriarchal time.
Hmm.
Um, in terms of being non-Israelite, why being non-Israelite? I mean, some people would say it's to make Job more universal, um, because this sort of theme about disinterested piety is how, yeah, it's often called. This is kind of a transcultural, transtemporal kind of question.
Hmm.
I'm satisfied with that to a degree. I would also, though, say that parts of the Bible that seem very covenantal and very Israelite, if you will, are also very transferable because God is the God of the nations ultimately. And so
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to just say wisdom literature is doing this weird universal thing and it's applicable outside of Israel, whereas the rest isn't. So I don't
Right.
want to go there.
Yeah.
Um, I think there could be something about linking it up with this wisdom tradition. So if you want to explore the nature of wisdom, in a similar way to using kind of the persona of Solomon for Ecclesiastes, whether or not he wrote the book, at least kind of the persona is there
Right.
in the figure of a prelate.
Yep.
Um, in First Kings 4, it says that Solomon's wisdom was greater than all the wisdom of Egypt and all the sons of the East. Job is greater than all the sons of the East. So
Mm.
he's belonging to this wisdom tradition in the East. And so I think that could be another way that the book is sort of drawing out this extreme thought experiment. Okay, let's take a wisdom tradition then, and we're going to execute our search, our quest in that context.
Yeah.
I think that could be another bit.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. That's good to chew on for folks that are trying to situate Job. This is a great question. Somebody asked at the end of chapter 3, Job says, "That which I feared has come upon me, and what I dreaded has happened to me." Some teach that there's a connection between Job's fear and the things that happened to him. How would you respond to that claim?
His fear and the things that happened to him.
Like, and I could
Um,
see how this being taught in maybe more charismatic circles, more name it and claim it or manifest, like the thing you fear is what's going to happen
oh,
to you, and that get so don't fear, or else it'll
oh,
like
interesting. Yeah. I would say that that's just more of a um yeah, more of a statement of Job's recognition that yeah, that everything has fallen apart. What had seemed so whole in his life has just completely fractured. And
mm,
it does seem to him, I think he has a basic expectation of the retribution principle working like the friends do. Like
right,
this shouldn't happen to him. He's done nothing to deserve it. Um, and so in that sense, yeah, he's kind of expecting his life to stay intact, and it's not
right,
anymore.
right.
Um,
Well, too, also, I mean, what would you think the idea, any parent, their worst fear is losing their children and
yeah, oh
disaster
man,
falling on them. So to me, that doesn't, I don't think there's much deeper than that, but I don't
yeah.
know if that is something that you had addressed or not. But yeah, it was a good question that the person asked.
It's also, I guess, we're saying that the two verbs in that verse used for fear are different than for Job's fear of God. So the word used for Job's fear of God could be used for like a very visceral, yeah, very
Mm,
visceral fear, but it's not. I don't think you're meant to link that verse up with Job's fear of God. Yeah, so I would just caution against doing any of those kind of
yeah.
moves. I don't think this person was suggesting that, but just to say, different verbs.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm skimming through a lot of these again, or you've already answered a lot of these in our discussion.
Mm, that's good.
So yeah, actually most of these you have. One person asked, was Job in 1:1 righteous, blameless, and upright because of his deeds or because God said that he was?
Interesting. I think God said he was because he was. As in, like, yeah, the narrator and God are affirming the reality of Job's character. Like, he
Mm-hmm.
is a genuine person of integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, when he goes on in chapter 31, I think you get this really colorful, detailed portrait of what Job's being blameless, upright, fearing God, and turning away from evil has looked like in his life,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of caring for the poor and keeping himself from lust or adultery and not being greedy, like not just wanting wealth for the sake of wealth, these sorts of things. Um, so, yeah,
That
both of them.
question is definitely the question of someone thinking systematic theology, as opposed to exegetically, is
You're
the
so
idea.
good at this, JM. Yeah, understanding kind of where the
Yeah.
questions are.
Well, I know who asked it too, so I kind of have a little background
Oh,
on it. But no, but that is a
yeah.
question that a lot of people that, imputed righteousness versus imparted righteousness and, you know,
Interesting.
works righteousness and it just all those later 16th century
Yeah.
questions that dominate a lot of popular understandings of biblical books. But I
Yeah.
like how you said it. God said he was because he was. I think
Because he was.
yeah. There's one question that was asked, and you don't have to answer this because you answered it in the last video, but I want to make sure because some viewers may be just catching this episode and not have seen the full one. But someone asked, how is it that Job spoke what is right about God in God's assessment in 42:7, but also repented to God after God answered him? And Ellie talked about that, and we looked at that passage in the last episode. So go check that out because it's a translation issue to a large degree.
In both cases, yeah, yeah, being commended and whether or not he repented. Yeah. So,
Yeah. One person asks, oh, okay, so this is probably the second most often besides behind Satan is, what about Leviathan and Behemoth? Are they
oh,
real? Are they chaos creatures, mythological chaos creatures? Or are they just huge natural animals? Or are they dinosaurs like art museums and creation exhibits will
yeah.
suggest? So what do we do
Yeah.
with Behemoth and Leviathan?
All right. So, in a phrase, which I quite like, tell me what you think. I've taken to calling them zoologically inspired and mythologically evocative,
Ooh.
meaning that they kind of look like
Uh-huh.
a souped up hippo and crocodile in
Right.
some respects, right? Respectively for Behemoth and Leviathan. So there are aspects of them that, yeah, kind of look like animals. At the end of chapter 39, what have you had? Wild animal, wild animal, wild animal, wild animal. And then you get to Behemoth, which in Hebrew is the plural
Mhm.
for wild animal or
Right.
beast. So it's like, here's your creature par excellence.
And it usually
Um,
means cattle, right? Like it usually means livestock.
Oftentimes, yeah, but
Behemoth.
it could also though be used for more kind of wild animals.
Right.
Um, yeah, depending on the context in which it's used.
Hmm.
And then I think already you're sort of edging on kind of these mythological features, maybe for Behemoth, but even more when you get to Leviathan, which, by the way, Job has already talked about those who are ready to rouse Leviathan in chapter 3 in a more mythological setting.
Right.
So, like, I think you're very much meant to have, yeah, mythological overtones coloring. There's, fire and smoke coming out of this animal, which, yeah, is obviously pushing it beyond the realm of natural creatures.
Hmm.
But importantly, they're both created and both of them are entirely unthreatening to God.
Hmm.
So humans cannot master them, no hope, not even close. And yet they pose no threat at all to their creator. Um, so it's not like you have this battle between God and Leviathan,
Right.
where
Which
you
you
get
do
that
in
kind of, yeah, chaos battle
yeah.
motif. Uh, in some other places in the Old Testament, but you don't have that here. At
Hmm.
least not between God and Leviathan, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you would say, like, what if somebody gets excited and they said, "Oh, the Bible talks about dinosaurs, and this proves that the world," like, where do you go with that? Do you just go? I mean, how do you, as a Job scholar, steer
Yeah.
somebody away from misreading the text in that way and to seeing what's actually happening? What would you say?
Yeah. I guess for one, I would always like to lead with a question wherever possible and just try to understand where that's coming from. Like, why is it so important that dinosaurs are in the Bible, and what might that actually reveal or indicate about what we think the Bible is
Mm-hmm.
and needs to be in order to be true? Um, and then, yeah, just kind of a gentle encouragement to, yeah, meet the text in its terms and try to read it well read Behemoth and Leviathan, firstly within the context of the book, and then think about the rest of the Old Testament and where these terms are used. And yeah, as much as possible, I'm trying to sort of acquire the the grammar of the Old Testament, so to speak. And it has a different cosmology actually than I do. I don't just mean grammar in like a Hebrew sense, but actually, yeah, the way of understanding and articulating reality. And so I need to kind of adopt the idioms of the text and try to understand them on their terms if I
Mm-hmm.
want to be a good.
That's
Um,
great advice. Yeah.
so I
Folks,
think
if you're
that's
watching, if you are interested in more specifically about Leviathan, check out the video here on the channel, Dragons in the Bible, where we look at that issue and a lot of the symbolism that Ellie's talking about and the mythological background, what it would have communicated in scripture. Let me ask you one, speaking of grammar. Is there anything, how does the Hebrew style, vocabulary, syntax, etc., compare to Psalms, Ecclesiastes, or other Hebrew poetry?
Oh, that's a really excellent question. There are so many scholars who will, in rather generalized, fairly subjective ways,
Mhm.
but very emphatic ways, say that Job has some of the most glorious, sophisticated poetry, maybe the most superlative degree in all of the Hebrew Bible. Um, it is really witty, like in terms of concentration of sound play and word play. And I know that I'm only catching a mere fraction of what's actually going on in text. I'm well aware of that. So it's particularly hard, largely because of a lot of these rare words that I think you mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
JM. And the syntax can be quite tricky too. Like, how do I actually fit these words together into something that makes sense? So it's, on one hand, some people will say it feels problematic, like you don't quite know how to translate certain lines. But at the same time, everyone's saying, oh, but it's brilliant. So, yeah,
That sounds like
it's,
a lot of poetry in general to me.
I know, I know.
If I don't understand it, it's got to be brilliant.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Being
yeah.
inspired helps, though. Having
That's right.
being inspired scripture, yeah. But it would you say it reads on a scale of 1 to 10, how different is the poetry in Job versus the poetry in Psalms, for instance? Like 10 being they're not even the same genre, and 1 being there's no difference whatsoever.
Oh, I mean, like a two or three. Like,
Okay.
yeah, they're very much both Hebrew poetry that's it, yeah, belongs in the same corpus.
Okay.
Um, and Psalms are not necessarily easy. Job just is harder for everyone.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you do just get to Job and go, oh man, this is really gonna slow me down, and I'm really gonna have to work.
That's what
Yeah.
when I do a podcast with Michael Halcomb of Glossa House, and we it's called 10 Questions, and he just puts a random verse in a Bible verse generator, and then we look at
Okay.
it and we each ask 5 questions, and we can't answer it. We just have to ask the questions and to kind of model for viewers, like asking questions about the text. And every time it pulls up a wisdom verse, it's way harder, or way more questions have to do with translation than if it's a
Yeah.
verse from Torah or from the prophets, without fail. Like if it's
Yeah.
Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job, Song of Song, like we're always just sitting there like, oh, why is this verb used here? And how did the English get from that to this? And
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, very challenging.
okay,
I would,
let's do some from YouTube now real quick, and then we can wrap up. So is Job a type of Christ?
mm, ultimate righteous sufferer. Like in that sense, Jesus is. Yeah. Major difference though being that Job suffers unknowingly. This has just happened to him and it's inexplicable.
Mm,
Whereas, yeah, Jesus is consummately aware, excruciatingly aware of exactly what he's about to walk into. Um, and very much for cause, for our reason, not his reason.
right.
Um, yeah, so obviously diverging there, but yeah, in terms of being
Is it enough
one,
to say? Is it enough to say that? I mean, I guess that would get into a bigger question of how you view typology in general. But I wouldn't. I haven't thought of Job as a type of Christ. I've thought of Job as something different. But is that you wouldn't say that's out of the question?
no, no,
Okay.
but I would put it with, as I said in the earlier episode, put it with Jesus also being the perfect intercessor and friend. So he's also, yeah, the ultimate expression of what the friends ought to have been
Mm,
and what Job kind of is for them in the epilogue as a friend and interceding. And he's the theophany, right? He's also God's answer.
right.
So he's, yeah, more than just Job in the book, I
I
would say.
like in the last episode you said Jesus ties up a lot of the threads of Job. Like he
Mm,
ties together a lot of the threads of the book. And
yeah.
I think that's a really wise way to put it. Instead of trying to make a one-to-one correspondence, like Jesus is just Job 2.0. Like, no,
Yeah.
he's the whole thing, the whole milieu of the book that it's wrestling with. It's like converges on Jesus
Yeah.
in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. Okay, so
Yeah. I
this
think,
question someone asked, they said, I want to know the other interpretations of Job outside of the classical interpretation most people take, like him being self righteous or not truly knowing God. Uh, are there any views that you've come across that you don't agree with, but that are just completely outside the norm? Like, does anybody take the view that Job's the bad guy, or?
oh, interesting. I would say that um scholars tend to be quite kind to Job. The character who really has a rough go in scholarship is God. So I've genuinely sometimes been reading scholarship and I think, well, this is actually a bit hard to read because the characterizations of God,
Yeah.
um, yeah, that people will come up with as they wrestle with the book can be unflattering is a mild way to put it. Um, yeah, and I think though the book is almost making it hard for you on purpose. Like I think it's in setting up this unfair scenario, like it does, as I say, push you into this crisis of decision in what you want to do with the God of Job, whether you want to reject him or whether you want to trust him.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, so you're kind of set up with Job to have a very serious decision to make about this God, and whether you will curse him to his face, as the adversary says, uh, or yeah, worship him like Job does.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, so I would say that's probably the most striking kind of place where you have a real range of opinions and characterization. Job tends to get a lot of sympathy from all corners. um,
All right.
yeah.
Okay, so this is a question. Some scholars say that Job's children were revived. Is it
Oh,
new kids in
fascinating.
the epilogue or the same ones that he got back?
Wow. Yeah, I've never read it as his previous children being revived. I think he has new children. um,
Fair
yeah.
enough. All right. Somebody said in Job 19:25 through 27, I know that my
Mm.
Redeemer lives passage, I believe. Yeah, I know that my Redeemer lives and that in the end he will stand upon the earth. After my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes and not another, how my heart yearns within me. That's the old NIV. Somebody asked, is Job prophesying about Jesus?
Oh, this is a really difficult. I mean, obviously, of yeah, all kinds of Christian appropriations of that. So I want to be careful not to just sort of out of hand dismiss all of that. I think you need to situate Job's longing for this redeemer in the context of the kind of mediator figure. It's like Job entertains all of these hypothetical scenarios
Mm.
of what it would be like to meet God and what he needs in order to actually have a profitable exchange with God, as it were. And this is kind of on that journey. So in chapter 16, he said, I have a witness in heaven. And now in chapter 19, I know my Redeemer lives. I think it's striking within the book that he's certain that he will see, that he will see God. And he really does. Like, that's what he says in chapter 42, verse 5. I'd heard of him by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye has seen him.
Mm.
So what exactly he's imagining when he speaks of this Goel, this redeemer, is not entirely clear, but it's against the backdrop of just saying to his friends, why do you turn against me like God does? And he even says, are you not satisfied from my flesh? And then he'll say, from my flesh, I will see God. So he's using similar language to what he was just using to critique the friends for their failure to get on his side. And so now he is saying, yeah, there's got to be someone on my side, whether that Goel is meant to be read as God or as a third party.
Mm.
Opinions vary.
Right. And obviously, if you're Jewish versus if you're Christian, it'll be a huge,
That's going to
that'll be the
change.
divide for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, most of the, like I said, somebody asked real quick the phrase the NIV translates as brace yourself like a man. What does that
Ah,
actually say in Hebrew?
oh, that's amazing. Zorna hegever chaladzecha, which is gird up your loins like a man. I'm so glad someone asked about that. That's one of my favorite Hebrew phrases. Gird up your loins. So basically, this is a way of talking about getting ready for sort of strenuous physical labor. So if you're wearing a long robe
Hmm.
and you're a man and you want to use your legs to do something like fight in a battle or run, you have to tie up your robe, um, on kind of your hips so that you can actually have freedom of movement in your legs. So slightly different language, but when Elijah outruns the chariot back to Jezreel, he girds up his loins and runs. I think here the imagery is martial, it's military language. So God's basically saying, you know what, Job, you were conceiving of me as being your opponent and in war this whole time, saying that God is slashing open my kidneys, his arrows are piercing me, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, Job, get ready for battle then. And let's see how it goes for you if we're actually, adversaries in battle, which is, I think, quite a wry, maybe some even say sarcastic tone. But yeah, that's the brace yourself like a man. I'm all for bringing back gird up your loins in that. I like to just use that in general for being ready for something.
Yeah.
Like I'm girded. I'm
Yeah.
ready.
Gird those loins. One
Yeah.
person asked might Elihu's poetry be inferior, as some scholars put it, purposefully, or to reflect a child in contrast to grown men in the debate? I've never heard it said that his poetry was different than the others, but is there anything to that?
Interesting. I wouldn't say interesting. I wouldn't go for inferior, certainly. That's much too kind of sweeping
Right.
uh, value judgment. Some people have said it has a higher concentration of Aramaisms, words borrowed from Aramaic. Others have disputed that. Some have said, um, he's like a bit more cosmopolitan. Like actually, he's maybe a bit more sophisticated in his poetry as kind of this young upshot. Maybe, maybe not. I mean, it's all quite high level poetry in terms of the register. This is a really subjective impression, but when I was memorizing the book, I found that, okay, so by the time I've gotten to Elihu, I've done this for 31 chapters. So my brain's gotten fairly used to Job.
Uh,
And yet, all the way, I realize I'm descending into darkness here.
yes,
Sorry.
it's getting more
Okay.
ominous as we go, which is kind of cool.
I know. Whew, I could just turn on the light, but anyway, I will eventually. Um, the sun is setting in the UK at
Yeah.
this time of day.
Yeah. We're about to wrap it up. So
Yeah, it's the indicator for me that I need to stop talking like
that's right.
Eliahu. I need to
The
stop
music
talking.
is playing. God's using the play the music off stage.
Yes, get off the stage. Um, yeah, when I got to Elihu though, I just felt like it was so much harder to store his content in my head. Like it just felt way less organizable in my brain
Yeah.
compared to when I got to the divine whirlwind speeches, and all of a sudden I was just clipping along again.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't, again, very subjective impression, but it did feel much more scattered to me.
Yeah.
Difficult to hang
I
together.
could see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Richard Middleton, when we were talking about it, he said, he's like, Elihu, his speech is so, like, God doesn't even answer because he's like
Get off.
dismissive. Like, you've added nothing.
Yeah.
Get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Last question, and we'll go. This person asked,
Yeah.
do you think Job's wife gets a bad rap?
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Some people, especially in feminist streams of interpretation, really do what I think are exegetical backbends in order to kind of rehabilitate Job's wife as a positive literary character.
Yeah.
I just think she has a negative role in the book, as in she's basically incarnating right in front of Job's face the conversation that was just had in heaven that he didn't hear, and bringing this temptation
Yeah.
to curse God, like right to crisis level, right in front of his face in his most intimate relationship.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, she, like the adversary, don't occur later in the book because their literary function has been served. Now, does that mean that it would say anything in general about wives? No, of course not.
Right. Right.
I just think within this particular text, yeah, that's the literary function she serves and then
Yeah.
she receives. So, yeah, no, I don't think she gets an unfairly bad rap. I just think the text characterizes her negatively.
Yeah. That's good stuff. Well, listen, folks, check out the episode before as Ellie descends into the darkness of night in the UK. Ellie, thank you so much for spending the afternoon. I know you have stuff to do. You're super busy, but it's just a joy to sit here and chat with you. Is there some way that people can contact you or interact with you, or are you too busy secluded in libraries to be bothered with the common folk?
I am a bit of an odd young person that I have no social media.
Yes.
So I'm not in that space. I do have a Substack that I write monthly for. So that's
Perfect.
an option. Ellie
Awesome.
Marie on Substack.
Yeah. I didn't know if you had like
Otherwise,
a faculty page or student page, or I didn't know how that worked.
yeah, I do have a faculty page. And sometimes people find that and they just send me an email. So yeah, occasionally those trickle in and I'm happy to interact with those.
Awesome.
So
Maybe there's a church that wants to bring you to come do a Job seminar or something like that. Yeah. So, well, thank you so much. I love it. I'll see you at SBL, right?
yeah, that's right. Lord
Awesome.
willing.
Well, I'm looking
Unless the
forward
eschaton
to.
happens in the interval, then
It'll be a good time. Get to reconnect and hear what all you've been up to. But thank you for stopping by Disciple Dojo. We are thrilled when we get scholars that are doing exciting work and work that others need to know about. So I'm happy to introduce you to the viewers.
thanks so much, JM. Really enjoyed it.
All right. Cheers.